Life can be pretty strange sometimes. Like this one day, I was at the park and I accidentally flung a scoop of chocolate ice cream right onto someone's pants. Let's just say, my name's Julie and clumsy moments seemed to follow me everywhere. I was enjoying the sunny day with my favorite ice cream when I tripped, right near a bench where a guy was sitting, totally focused on his phone. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," I blurted out as the ice cream landed right on his leg. He looked up, more amused than upset, and then something unexpected happened. He laughed. "Guess I needed a little extra chocolate today," he joked. His easygoing reaction made me feel a bit less embarrassed. I quickly grabbed some napkins to clean up the mess. "I promise, I'm not usually an ice cream attacker," I said, trying to laugh it off. He waved his hand and smiled. "It's okay, sit down," he offered, motioning to the spot next to him. "I'm James, and thanks to you, I've got a funny story about how my day got better." I smiled back and sat down. "I'm Julie, and I guess I owe you an ice cream now." We hit it off right away. It turned out James worked in IT, not far from where I did my web design work from home. We talked about everything from tech to movies, and by the time we parted ways, we had already planned a date for the weekend. Fast forward, and things between us were going great. But then came the day I met his mom, Mrs. Charles. James had mentioned she was a bit old-fashioned, but nothing could have prepared me for meeting her. When I walked into their family home, there she was, sitting with a big astrology book open in front of her. "Hi, I'm Julie," I said, reaching out to shake her hand. She looked me up and down, clearly judging me, before lightly taking my hand. "James tells me you're a web designer and work from home," she said in a tone that made it sound like it wasn't a real job. "Yes, I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and it's going really well," I replied, feeling my face flush. She just hummed, flipping through her astrology book. "And when's your birthday, dear?" I told her, and she ran her finger along the pages of her book before clucking her tongue. "Oh, that's a tough date. Very challenging and not astrologically compatible with my James," she said, looking disappointed. I tried to stay calm, but it wasn't easy. "Well, we're doing just fine so far," I said. Mrs. Charles smiled, but it wasn't a friendly one. It was the kind of smile that made it clear she thought she knew better. "We'll see, dear. These things have a way of showing their true colors in time." The whole visit was tense. Everything she said felt like a subtle dig at me, my job, my background, even my taste in clothes. It was obvious that I wasn't what she had in mind for James. After 5 years of dating, dealing with her cold attitude, and just handling life's ups and downs, James and I decided to get married. Yeah, 5 years since that ice cream incident. But we were solid. Nothing could really shake us. One lazy Friday, we were sitting on the couch watching old comedy movies when James turned to me, his eyes serious, which was unusual for him. "Julie, I've been thinking," he said, and my stomach did that weird flip, like butterflies going crazy. "What's up?" I asked, trying to sound relaxed, even though my heart was racing. "I kinda want to spend the rest of my life watching bad movies with you. What do you say we make it official?" His smile was hopeful, almost shy, which wasn't like him at all. I laughed, mostly out of relief, because I wanted this more than anything. "Are you asking me to marry you without a ring, James Charles?" "Damn right I am," he said, grinning. "But I promise I'll get you a ring that'll make up for this lame proposal." He hugged me, and it felt like everything was just right. Planning the wedding, though, was a whole other story, especially with Mrs. Charles giving her opinion at every turn. One evening, we were picking out wedding invites, and of course, she was there looking over my shoulder like a hawk. "You're not seriously considering this design, are you?" She frowned at the floral pattern James and I had chosen. "It's far too girly." "Mom, it's what we want." "I like it," James said, always standing up for me. "I like it too," I added, more to stand my ground than anything else. I wasn't going to let her control every decision we made. "It's your wedding," she sighed, clearly unhappy. "But remember, the invitation set the tone for the whole event. The big day came faster than I expected. It was perfect, beautiful even, despite Mrs. Charles's constant hovering. James looked amazing, and when I walked down the aisle toward him, his grin said it all. We had our wedding ceremony outside, under a big old oak tree. The Henry was a friend of James's, someone who knew us both well as a couple, not just as two people getting married. Do you, Julie, take James to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? And do you, James, take Julie to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part? We exchanged rings, and when James slid the ring onto my finger, it felt like we had won not just against Mrs. Charles's comments or the stress of planning the wedding, but overall, the challenges life had thrown at us. You may now kiss the bride, the Henry said, and James didn't wait for a second. As soon as he kissed me, cheers erupted from all around. It felt like a scene from a movie, but even better because it was real, and it was our moment. We had been living together for 3 years, and everything felt right. But buying our own home was a big step. We spent our weekends looking at houses, discussing what we liked, and figuring out what we could afford. One sunny Monday, we found a house that checked almost all the boxes. It was charming, with a big kitchen and a spacious backyard. The only problem? It had a lake pool. I had told James about my fear of water, a fear I'd carried since I almost drowned as a child. Since then, I avoided lake pools, even bathtubs. But James, bless him, loved everything else about the house. Julie, I know it has a lake pool, but hear me out. Everything else is perfect, and we're getting it at a great price, James said, trying to calm my worries as we looked at the house. I bit my lip, thinking. The house was really beautiful, and the price was almost too good to pass up. Okay, but I'm not going near that lake pool, James. You know that, right? James wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. Of course, babe. We'll figure it out. Maybe later on we can fill it in or something. For now, we don't have to use it. We moved in, and it was like a dream come true. The house and the neighborhood felt perfect, but it didn't take long before Mrs. Charles came over to see our new place. I braced myself for her usual comments. She always had a way of showing her disapproval, especially when it came to money and my job. As she walked through our living room, her eyes took in every detail, her lips tight. Finally, she spoke, her tone dripping with doubt. It's a big house, isn't it? Must have cost a lot. James, are you sure you can manage the mortgage? James, always the peacemaker, tried to ease the tension. Mom, we've got it under control. Julie and I both pitched in for the house. It's not just on me. I chimed in, tired of the assumption that I was relying on James. That's right, Mrs. Charles. I work too, you know. My web design job pays well, and it helped us get this place. She scoffed, clearly not believing me. Working from home on your computer all day? That doesn't sound like it brings in enough to afford a place like this. Seems more like a hobby than a real job. The rest of her visit passed in a blur of forced smiles and awkward topic changes. After she finally left, I let out a long breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. James hugged me tightly, pulling me close. Ignore her, Julie. We know the truth. We're doing this together, and that's what matters. As weeks went by, our new house started to feel like home. I set in my office, and it became my safe space. From there, I worked on web design projects that not only paid well, but also showed that I could contribute just as much to our life together. James took care of the yard and kept up with the lake pool, even though I never went near it. Then, one sunny afternoon, the incident happened. Mrs. Charles had decided to drop by, supposedly to bring some of James's old stuff from his childhood. But I knew she had more on her mind. She always had a way of turning a simple gesture into something more critical. We were out in the backyard, making small talk, when her eyes landed on the lake pool. Julie, I never see you or James in that lake pool. Don't you ever swim? Her question caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, figuring honesty might stop the conversation from going further. Actually, I'm afraid of water. I had a bad experience as a kid, almost drowned. I haven't felt comfortable around lake pools or large bodies of water since. Her expression changed from curiosity to something different. I couldn't quite figure out what Mrs. Charles's expression meant. Was it disbelief? Disdain? Whatever it was, it didn't feel supportive. Well, that's just unusual, isn't it? A grown woman afraid of a little water, she scoffed, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I tried to laugh it off, but the conversation left me feeling uneasy. Later, I found out it wasn't just an awkward moment, it was the start of rumors. Mrs. Charles, in her usual way, had shared my fear of water with her friends and family, but she had twisted the story. By the time it made its way back to me, the story was that I was mentally unstable because of my phobia. A friend who'd heard the rumor asked me, "Julie, is it true what they're saying? That you're too scared to even look at your own lake pool?" I felt hurt and betrayed, so I talked to James about it. He was just as surprised. "She said that? That's it. I'm talking to her, this has to stop." James confronted his mother, and things exploded. He made it clear her behavior was out of line, but instead of backing down, Mrs. Charles got even worse. She started accusing me of manipulating James and trying to keep him away from her. One afternoon, she called me directly, her voice sharp and accusing. "You're just trying to keep me out of the house. What are you hiding, Julie? Meeting someone else while my son's at work?" Her words were like poison, meant to hurt me. I was stunned. "Mrs. Charles, that's ridiculous. I would never cheat on James, you know that." But she wouldn't listen. "Oh, I know your type. You think you're clever, but I know what's going on." I told James about the call, and he was just as shocked. "She said that? That's insane, Julie. You know it's not true, and I know it's not true," he said, trying to laugh it off. But I was shaken. The fact that his own mother would go so far to make me look bad was disturbing. James agreed, and we decided it was time to set some boundaries. After that, Mrs. Charles's visits became less frequent. And when she did come over, James made sure to be there so he could step in if needed. Things started to settle down, but a few weeks after the big blow-up with her, I began noticing small things that seemed off. Little things that wouldn't mean much to anyone else, but to me, they felt like signs. It started with the feeling of being watched. At first, I thought I was just imagining it. When I was at the grocery store, picking out vegetables, I'd get this strange feeling, like someone was staring at me. I'd turn around and sometimes catch a glimpse of someone looking away quickly. I told myself it was nothing, probably just other shoppers. But then it happened again, this time at the laundromat. I was folding clothes when that same feeling came over me. I glanced up and saw a man standing across the street, just staring straight at me. I blinked, and he was gone. "You're being paranoid, Julie," I muttered to myself as I shoved the clothes into my bag. But the real shock came one evening at home. James was working late, and I was in the living room catching up on some web design work. That feeling of being watched hit me again. I peeked out the window, and there he was, the same man from the laundromat. He was standing across the street, barely visible in the dim streetlight, but definitely there, definitely watching. I grabbed my phone and called James, my voice a bit shaky. "James, I think someone's been following me. I've seen him a few times now." James stayed calm, maybe too calm. "Julie, love, you're probably just tired. You've been working a lot lately. Maybe you should take a break." I tried to believe him, thinking maybe it was all in my head. I started doing yoga and tried meditation to calm down, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. I just couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. Then it happened again. I was leaving the grocery store, and there he was, standing in the parking lot. This time, I was ready. I quickly pulled out my phone and snapped a picture before he could walk away. Finally, I had proof this wasn't just my imagination. That evening, I showed the photo to James. I could tell he finally understood. "Okay, that's not normal," he admitted. Later that night, we were walking home from a nearby restaurant when James suddenly grabbed the arm of a man passing by. It was him, the man from the photo. "Why are you following my wife?" James's voice was tense, and he held the man's arm tightly. The guy looked cornered, his eyes darting around before he let out a sigh. "Look, I'm a private investigator. I was hired to watch her, that's all." James's face darkened. "Hired by who?" "Your mother," the investigator confessed, looking embarrassed. "She wanted proof of infidelity." James was furious. He pulled out his phone right there and called his mother. "Mom, what the hell? You hired someone to follow Julie? That's it. You're out of our lives until you can act like a decent human being." The conversation was heated, and by the time it was over, James was shaking with anger. On the way home, he apologized to me over and over. The next day, James went out and bought cameras for every corner of our property. No one's going to invade our privacy like that again, he promised as he installed them. After everything that had happened, James suggested we take a vacation to clear our heads. Let's just get away from all this drama, Julie. Just you and me, somewhere peaceful, he said one evening while we sat on the couch, exhausted, in a house that now felt too loud with all the tension. I didn't need any convincing. Yes, let's do it. I really need a break, James. We decided on a small cabin up in the mountains, away from everything and everyone. It was perfect. The air was fresh, the views were beautiful, and most importantly, it was just the two of us. No distractions, no interruptions. Up there, surrounded by nature's calm, I could feel all the stress melting away. We spent our days hiking and our evenings cuddled up by the fire. I could finally breathe again, laugh again, and just be myself without worrying about anything. When we returned home, I was glowing not just from the mountain sun, but from a newfound joy. I was pregnant. We found out a few weeks after we got back, and it filled us with happiness, though I also felt a bit anxious. I didn't want anyone to know yet, especially not Mrs. Charles. I was afraid the stress she could bring might harm our little miracle, something we had been waiting for so long. Working from home made it easy to keep the pregnancy a secret. I didn't go out much, and my belly stayed small, which the doctor said was a little unusual, but nothing to worry about. Every pregnancy is different, he assured us during one of my checkups. As I approached my 9th month, it became harder to keep my condition hidden. James and I decided it was finally time to share our news. We planned a small celebration at our home, a baby shower of sorts, inviting all our relatives. Despite everything that had happened, I felt it was the right thing to invite Mrs. Charles. Taking a deep breath, I dialed her number, my heart racing. It rang 5 times before she answered. Hello. Hi, it's Julie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I wanted to share some news. James and I are expecting a baby. We're having a little get-together next week to celebrate, and we'd love for you to come. There was a long pause, long enough to make me worry I had made a mistake. Then her voice, surprisingly calm, said, I'll be there. The day of the celebration arrived, and our home was filled with laughter and joy. Our relatives fussed over baby clothes, making guesses about whether it would be a boy or a girl. I mingled with the guests, my hand often resting on my small belly, feeling the gentle kicks of our baby. Everything was fine until my worst fear came true. Mrs. Charles showed up. Throughout the afternoon, she kept her distance, whispering to anyone who would listen, hinting that my pregnancy was a lie. Look at her, she said spitefully. 9 months pregnant and barely showing. She's made this all up to trap my son and take his money. Thankfully, her words didn't have much effect. The guests chuckled and rolled their eyes, knowing her history of constant disapproval of me. They dismissed her accusations as just another one of her wild stories. But Mrs. Charles didn't stop. I'll prove it to all of you, she muttered angrily, stomping off, her face red with either anger or embarrassment, maybe both. Feeling a mix of frustration and determination to end this nonsense, I followed her out to the courtyard near the lake pool. Can we just talk? This isn't true, and you know it, I pleaded, keeping my voice steady even though I felt a storm of emotions inside. Her face twisted with anger. Save it. I know exactly what you're up to, she snapped, her tone ice-cold. As I turned away, desperate to convince her, I suddenly felt a hard shove from behind. I lost my balance and stumbled forward. The edge of the lake pool came closer, and before I knew it, I was falling into the water. Fear took over as I sank, the same panic from my childhood gripping me. Darkness crept into my vision as I struggled, my mind screaming for help. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed, the soft beeping of machines filling the room. James was there, his face pale and worried as he held my hand tightly. How's the baby? I croaked, my voice barely above a whisper. James squeezed my hand, his eyes filled with tears. The doctors had to do an emergency delivery. "He's in intensive care now," he whispered, his voice shaking with fear. My heart sank, tears welling up in my eyes. Our baby, our little boy, was fighting for his life in an incubator. The next morning, I woke up still in shock, the events of the previous night playing over and over in my mind like a terrible loop. Feeling weak, but determined to understand what had really happened, I turned to James. "You need to check the security footage from last night," I said. I turned to James, my voice shaky but urgent. "Your mom, she pushed me into the lake pool. It wasn't an accident." James looked confused, almost unwilling to believe it. "Julie, are you sure? Mom can be tough, but to physically push you? That doesn't sound like her." "Just check the cameras, please," I insisted, my stomach in knots, afraid he wouldn't take me seriously. James nodded slowly, pulling out his laptop to access the security footage from the cameras we had installed. The tension in the room was thick as he fast-forwarded through the video. I watched his face change from doubt to shock and horror as the truth played out on the screen. "Oh my God. Julie, I'm so sorry. I can't believe she did this," he stammered, his face pale as he looked at me, the laptop forgotten beside him. He immediately called the police. The evidence was undeniable, leading to his mother's quick arrest. Mrs. Charles was charged, and the trial was set. Her defense was that it was all a joke, a way to prove I was faking my pregnancy. She claimed she thought my belly was fake and expected it to fall off when I hit the water, exposing my lie in front of everyone. But the video and witness testimonies told a different story. The jury didn't believe her excuse of a prank gone wrong. She was found guilty of assault and reckless endangerment. The judge, stern in his verdict, sentenced her to 2 years in prison. He also ordered her to pay substantial compensation for our medical bills and the rehabilitation costs for our son, who had been born prematurely due to the trauma of the incident. To cover the fines and compensation, Mrs. Charles had to sell her house. As our son fought through his early months, undergoing many medical treatments and therapy to catch up in his development, the strain on us was immense. Every day was filled with hospital visits, therapy sessions, and constant worry. But over time, with relentless care and medical help, our little boy began to thrive. Through it all, James and I grew closer. The challenges we faced only strengthened our bond, and our love for each other and for our son deepened in ways we hadn't imagined. As Mrs. Charles's release date got closer, I made an important decision for our family's safety. I filed for a restraining order against her, and it was granted. She was not allowed to have any contact with us, especially with our son. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. Keeping our child safe was the most important thing, and we couldn't risk more problems in our lives. One evening, after we put our son to bed, James looked at me with a gentle smile. "You know, despite everything, I feel lucky. We have each other, we have him, and we have a future." It James the end of a difficult chapter in our lives. But more importantly, it was the start of a new one filled with hope, healing, and happiness.